that was the first item of business. Item 2 on the agenda is roll call. Give us just a second here, and we'll proceed through with the roll call. We're going to make sure all the recorders are running. Right, we got one back there, one over there, one up there. So everybody's got it. So we're ready for the roll call.
Chairman Shepherd,
Here.
Vice Chair Kelly. Here. Mr. Khan,
Here.
Mr. Vergari,
Here.
Ms. McLaughlin. Here. Mr. Lewandowski,
Here.
and Ms. Merlot is absent.
Yes,
And excused.
and we expected that. Okay. Next item is approval of agenda. Is there someone that would like to make a motion to that effect?
I'd like to make a motion to present the agenda as submitted.
Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. All right, so we have a motion and a second, and all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Unanimous by voice vote. Item 4 for tonight's meeting is public comment. Yes, Ms. Hamilton.
When do you want us to comment on the parts of the growth management plan that you will be reviewing tonight?
Okay, that's a very good question. Here's what I plan to do when we go through the master plan, part 6 and 7, is to have the planner overview us by section, and then have questions, first from the members of the planning commission, then questions, comments from the public, and then we'll go back to the planning commission members and then close the discussion on this section. So we'll do it then.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other public comment? All right. We'll move on. Item 5, correspondence. We have a couple items that have come in. One that I have here, and I think the planning commissioner's got it, is a letter from Department of Natural Resources, and it mentions that they approved the recreation plan for Salem Township. So the work we went through in the Parks and Open Space Preservation Committee and the Township Board and everyone to get that plan whipped together and approved, the professionals too. I mean, it's been fruitful. The plan is approved for until December 31st, 2018. So that'll save us a little bit of work here in the next couple of years, which is good. We have 2 months of the planning and zoning news, the February and the March 2014 editions, and it's nothing critical, items of kind of interest and casual interest and enrichment. And then finally, we had some correspondence come to Township Clerk, Mr. Wensley, that was brought to the attention of the Planning Commission. And maybe it's related to a wetlands mitigation. Maybe you'd like to explain that a little bit, Mr. Neely? And we had some questions.
Yeah, I certainly can. This is related to a development project down in Canton Township. We're a developer there. This is all part of the Rouge River watershed. And a developer there in Canton Township is proposing to destroy a little less than an acre of wetlands as part of building some homes on a piece of, kind of an infield piece of property in between a couple of existing subdivisions. The state law related to wetlands requires the developer to mitigate those wetlands, so that if they're destroyed, that they have to be replaced, and they actually have to be replaced at greater than a 1-to-1 ratio. So they have to provide more wetland than they destroy, and it needs to be within the same watershed at a suitable location that the state Department of Environmental Quality accepts. This developer apparently controls the land here in Salem Township. They're north of North Territorial, and has proposed to create wetlands in this area that they've identified on the map that you received. They're proposing to create a little over an acre of wetlands adjacent to Johnson Creek. They're calling it forested wetlands. What I will say is that it will be forested someday. They're proposing that we actually just received in my email the full application that was submitted to the state. It's about 70 pages. Although much of it is still very conceptual, one of the key factors is they're proposing to put what amounts to seedling trees in, about 1 foot to 18 inches high, about 300 and some odd of them, I think 340 if I recall, over this acre of land, with the idea that eventually it would become forested wetland property. This is primarily a state issue. As I said, the permitting for the wetland mitigation is through the state DEQ. We are notified, we can comment on their plan. Our timing is a little tight, and that there's not really an opportunity to bring this back to you at a future meeting for comment. But there's also potentially a local permit as well. We're going to need to look at that and look at whether or not there needs to be a landfill filling permit related to the movement of the dirt that they're proposing to do. And if that's the case, then the administrator would notify the developer that they need to come in and deal with that issue. So that's where we stand. There's no homes associated with this. It's just adding some wetland, essentially taking some property out of the realm of development and adding it to the Johnson Creek watershed.
Yeah, I suppose that would be a bigger issue in a community that was planning on a substantial, let's say, subdivision or shopping mall on the spot that they're now going to turn into a wetland and take something that was planned for future tax rolls off, basically out of play, right?
That's true. It does, and that one benefit is it does have the potential at a very small scale to benefit the Johnson Creek water quality, because it will create a space where floodwaters can be held. The idea is that high water, that water would flow into this space and then flow out of it slowly, but also creates a greater buffer between the farmed property and the creek itself, so that less potential pollutants or silt can get into the creek.
Okay, and so, I mean, the size of the property here is just, you're talking an acre, basically, on a property that's huge.
Right. It's not a very big project overall.
Yeah, so it's I mean, you're not even gonna really notice it other than there might be some equipment moving at some point.
Right, and the reason I suggested to Ann that she put it in your correspondence was primarily because when they are doing the work out there, at whatever time that the permit is they're allowed to start, that it will look like a development project. And so there'll be questions that you may be asked by people that know that you're commissioners, and that way you can explain what's actually going on out there.
Mr. Chairman.
Okay.
Just one question. You know, it's confined within a subdivision of, fairly expensive homes there. And I just wonder if those people and those homes are aware that that's going to be expanded, or
No, there's no requirement to notify.
no required to notify. So they'll just, when they see all the bulldozers come, they'll know that they're going to have more wetlands.
Yeah, so, and they may call the township, which,
Right.
And that's really the reason why the state notifies the local governments, so that when those calls come,
Yeah.
that they can have an answer.
Yes, Mr. Pennington.
One other comment on wetlands. If you go Prospect Road to the south through Superior Township, around Reland Road, between Cherry Hill, going farther south, you'll see a lot of areas. You see the logs that were laid out there, like this, and all of that is mitigated wetland from a project that was somewhere in northeastern Detroit. That one is about, there's a couple stages. One's 40, the other's 60 acres. So all that area, pretty much from Cherry Hill south for a couple miles, is some type of wetland, much of which is mitigated. But it was interesting to see the whole project where they were grading it and getting it just right for the vegetation, all logs that they put out there, and it's beginning to take, but that's a real good example of a larger area for a wetland mitigation project.
Mm-hmm. I remember now, I've driven by there a number of times. Okay, anything else?
Yeah, I just want to ask a question. When they do this mitigation, how long is of a period of time? I mean, is this something that is permanently, no matter who owns the property, or, how does that work?
That's a very good question. It is created wetland, so it becomes then regulated as part of the protected wetlands under the state laws that govern that. It also becomes wetland as far as our ordinance is concerned, so that if the developer decided to develop the balance of that land, that they would have to stay 25, 50 feet away, and all the rules that apply in our zoning ordinance to a development project would apply to that created wetland, just as if it was a natural one. So it is permanent in that sense. Now, as with anything natural, over time it's going to evolve,
Right.
but it is essentially a permanent change.
So they can, like, if they develop around it, I'm just thinking it would, they probably have a reason to make it nice, because it could end up being part of the nice residential area.
It certainly has the potential to be a very nice space. They are similar to the Superior Township project. They are going to be putting in some logs and essentially simulating fallen trees that become wildlife habitat. And they're putting in prairie grasses and wetland plants and such. And as I said, they're putting in about 340 seedling trees. So an acre of land that has the potential to be a substantial, even if only 2/3 or half of them survive, that's still a substantial number of trees.
That's also interesting from another perspective, and that is a lot of communities that have received the mitigated wetland, the property around these areas goes up in value, because if you want to build a house, you can be assured that all of the area that is mitigated will basically stay that way, and you're not going to have neighbors and things of that nature.
Can't move again?
Pardon?
Someone couldn't come along and say, oh, I want to fill that in,
The
like
chances
from 1 acre
are,
to 1.5, and now 1.5 goes to 2 1/4
the
someplace
chances
else.
are very, very remote. A lot of them, when you look at it, there are timelines involved. But in reality, anything that goes into mitigated wetland, in our experience, that it's going to stay indefinitely. But it does raise the value, and sometimes you'll see not just like a subdivision, but some dwellings that will be on larger parcels, a little more expensive house that will come in because they're guaranteed that that area is going to stay open.
The people that develop that wetland, they're responsible for maintaining it then thereafter, are they not?
There's a plan, Rodney, there's a plan that they have to follow.
Yeah, the state, what you saw as part of a conceptual plan that's part of this initial application, once the state has essentially given their you might say conceptual blessing to it, they will submit detailed construction plans. And just as we do with final site plans, so they'll have the grading and all the details and how it will be done and how it will be maintained. And they also have to provide the state with a performance guarantee to ensure that the plant materials grow up properly, that the water flow works as it's intended to do, that sort of thing.
Now we're quiet. Okay. I think that finishes up the discussion on our correspondence related to a minor patch of wetland mitigation. Oh, yes.
It asks that we correspond, or we let them know if we have any concerns or comments. Do you want your comments and concerns to be forwarded to the DEQ? Let them know what permits may be needed based on the amount of fill and things like that.
I think
Yeah.
my suggestion is that we respond really to Phil.
I guess the way I would leave it right now is that one of the members of the planning commission believes the planning commission should comment in any particular way on this, or, work with the other members of the township planning and zoning community to comment on this, we should have a motion to do that. But if we don't have a motion to do that, I would think that we have no comment, right? And so the question is, I'm not sitting here saying I see a need for a call to action, but I'm open to what people here would say.
I agree.
But we should notify them though of,
Yeah, I think if the planning commission doesn't have any comment, then my suggestion would be,
Yeah.
Donna, just let them know that they need the local permit.
yeah,
Leave it at that.
okay, and just send them, you know, what types of permits would be required, and we'd like to be kept informed, period, type of thing.
Okay, so I don't think we have to make a
Commission's
motion to make no
Okay,
comment, I think.
okay. We'll get it responded to there. I just want to make sure.
Okay, I think that's the easy way to do it. All right, now we'll move on. Item 6 is public hearing, but we don't have one tonight. Item 7 is new business items, and there were none identified. So we move down to item 8, old business items, master plan review, parts 6 and 7. Okay, and this is what we chose last month as the sections to go through in this meeting. And what we've been doing is having a planner run us through, give us a brief synopsis of what's contained in the section by headings, so that we ensure that all the planning commission members are familiar with the content of the master plan there. Then members of the planning commission can ask questions for elaboration from professionals. Then we'll give the public an opportunity to comment or ask for clarification. Then one last shot for the planning commission members, and then we move on. And we'll decide if we need to take action. And when we get to the end, we've had some recommendations from the planners of things to consider, and we will make sure we explicitly check to see whether we need to follow up on something on these sections or not. Okay, but you know, the intent is make sure we're all aware, and then say, is there a need for a detailed study? And so that's what we're going to try and get done tonight on sections 6 and 7. Section 6 is agricultural land use, section 7 is residential land use, and Mr. Nanny, if you'll lead us through section 6 as a starting point, please.
I think, first of all, these two sections of the master plan are very thorough, and certainly still remain quite relevant to what we're doing. The agricultural section, which is part 6, focuses on primarily on what you might call traditional agriculture. It talks a great deal about how to preserve agricultural lands in various forms, whether that's the PA 116 program, which is the state kind of temporary conservation easement program, or deed restrictions or purchase and development rights. As I said, really focuses on traditional agriculture and preserving that land in that form where it exists in the township. In our letter, our December letter, we noted that of course during the update of the zoning ordinance, we had substantial discussion and received a great deal of information about what I refer to here as value-added agriculture or agritourism activities. These are the cider mills and the other agricultural-oriented businesses that cater or encourage tourism activities in relation or along with them. And we had a discussion about in the zoning ordinance about the idea of helping the farming community diversify their income through some of these additional value-added activities, and including those elements, including a way that they get approval of those kinds of things in the zoning ordinance, which we did ultimately include that. And my suggestion would be is that this part 6 be updated essentially to reflect what we've done in the ordinance, kind of somewhat backwards. Typically we go master plan first, then ordinance. Here we've had the discussion in relation to the ordinance update, and my suggestion is we go back now and kind of build the foundation into the master plan that acknowledges these things. That's really the key change to part 6. Part 7, the residential land use, looks at the full range of land use types from rural homes to kind of the hamlet and more urban spaces, and of course the urban residential is intended for the urban service district on Goffredson Road. It again essentially sets out a set of policies when looking at residential projects. Here, I think this is focused again on kind of new residential development, which is certainly very, very important. But as we know from recent years, that we have a parallel challenge with existing housing stock, both through foreclosures and blight conditions in some cases, where there are some challenges and stresses on neighborhoods and on the areas of communities because of foreclosures and blight potential. And so our suggestion is that we look at considering expanding Part 7 to perhaps address that in some form as it fits the township. And look at perhaps putting some policies in place that might guide future decision-making related to existing housing, and essentially trying to put support under existing housing, make sure we don't get into situations of blight and neglect, or at least where they might exist, they don't get worse. We try to improve those situations. So that's really the key change to that section. Both these sections are fairly short, and as I said, the language that's in them is certainly very comprehensive.
Yeah, okay, they spell out basically objectives, policies, and strategies, right? And they're based on some preliminary information.
Right, so really what we're looking at here with these two is really looking at adding to this new element that has come into play in each case, this new element that's come to our attention since the plan was adopted. Not necessarily looking at changing what's there, but adding to it.
Okay. Who wants to start? Mr. Mayor?
Well, I was just going to ask, are you going to make recommendations for these changes in policy or additional policy to reflect, the existing residential in the one case and also the changes in the ordinance under the agricultural land use? Are there some recommendations you would make to direct us to make these changes? Or?
I think typically what we've done in the past with the master plan is Don has put together a draft document, essentially an initial draft, based on the discussion that we've had and the direction that has been given from the Plan Commission. Because you set the policy, you and the Township Board essentially set policy, land use policy for the township. And so we prepare language based on that discussion and direction, and then bring it back to you, and then we address any changes that need to be made to make sure it fits exactly what you want to see in the plan. So yes, typically what we would do is put together that initial draft document, but it certainly would be something that would be, I think, worked over pretty thoroughly after that by the commission.
Yeah, and if I would maybe elaborate, right, it's like, what we're trying to do is understand the content here and how dated or not it is, and then we would say, hey, I think we need to have a working session to, we need a proposal and a detailed review on what we would change. But we haven't decided to do that yet, because we just have a general suggestion, and to me, it seems like we should try and make sure we understand what the objectives, policies, and strategies are in these sections, and if we take any concern with that, right? And what Mr. Nanny has said, particularly on agricultural, is there doesn't seem to be any mention of agricultural tourism in the sections on agricultural policies, objectives, or strategies. Okay, and so that's a fact that we should note, and we can decide how significant that is after we get a chance to beat this around a little bit, is what I would say. Okay. Who else has something in mind? Because I have a few things, but I can be patient or I can go. I guess I'll go. I'm on page 48. And I'm right in section 603, where it talks about, it's really a setup paragraph, right? It talks about the loss of farmland between 1990 and 2000, where there used to be 9,000 acres of active agricultural in 90, and then in 2000 there was 6,800 approximately. And now that it's, I don't know, 13 years later, do we know what the continued trend is? Is that something that comes automatically from the county, or do we have to actually do a study to learn what the updated values would be?
I suspect there's updated data on this at this point. This is through the Southeast Michigan Council of Governments, and I suspect that you have updated numbers. This is done by
It's
satellite.
not like we do it, we go find the reference and we could get the information, so we could find that out. Not that it means much, although there was a trend there of 41% to 31%, and it might be interesting to understand just how dramatic the changes in agricultural land in the township have been over the last 13 years, right? Because I don't have an opinion. The next one that I wanted to talk about was there's map 15 on page 49. And that's kind of the key map here, because it says, as a long-term strategy, it's segregating land within the township into three categories. Lands that are suitable for long-term agricultural uses, that are shaded dark, and lands that can be productive but are not as suitable for long-term use, and then there's a bunch of white stuff that is obviously the third class, which is probably, it's implied that it's not very suitable for agriculture in those lands. And I wasn't around when this was done, so can you add some insight as to how the classification came about? Some of it's related to the soils that I could pull out, but then some of it seems to be related to, I don't know what, adjacent development or such.
Let me take that one, since I did the math. There's a lot of study that went into that map, and it was really kind of a compilation of several factors. It started off on a soil analysis that basically asked the question, what soils are really good for agricultural production? And we normally look at what's termed a Class 2 soil. It has high productivity and a variety of crops. And we did have a map that looked at the entire township for that type of soil classification. It was also an area that had existing farms, especially the stuff over on the west part of the state. A lot of existing farms. And a third factor was the farms normally were large farms, a lot of acreage in the farms. So that was pretty much the criteria for that area. Ongoing agriculture, good soils, large parcels, etc. The other thing regarding stability was that we really didn't see any kind of significant deterioration, parceling off, somebody coming in and buying land for things other than agriculture. Sure, you might see some houses go off, but that's a permitted use in agriculture. But there was not the infringement of a concentrated effort to bring in a subdivision, or something of that nature. So of all the land in the township, that was the good stuff. High productivity from several vantage points, so that was the delineation that we gave. The other classification, the larger dots, didn't quite have the good soils that would be a high level of field crops, the corns, the wheats or the soybeans or something of that nature. It was also an area where you could see a lot of smaller parcels, not the large farms as we noticed on the west side. And there were a lot more single-family residential dwellings within that area. Some of them were site condominiums, some of them were houses just on, parcels of land that would not really you know, it would not be agriculture simply because the use is gone. The property values are such that the agriculture probably would not, you know, survive, even if you get a lot of parcels together. And, you know, we spent a lot of time discussing the two major land uses, agriculture, residential, and when they start mixing, you see a deterioration of agriculture, or at least long-term stability of agriculture. So that area was pretty much of that persuasion. Then you get down into the southeast, a lot more houses, parcel splits, other types of impacts, M14 impact that came through the area. We centered the USD around the interchange of Goffredson and M14, established the USD, you know, service area, et cetera. So we saw that area as really not long-term agriculture, either by existing farms, large parcels, good soils, but predominantly by other factors such as, you know, the township looking at that area for non-agricultural uses. And that was something that went back a long time in history. So that was basically, in generic terms, how those three areas were designated. Now, it was understood that there could be pockets, you know, within any of these areas. There could be a good farm, or good farming, or highly productive farm, you know, within, you know, the second category. It may not be a corn or a wheat or a soybean or something, but it could be a very, you know, high-use farm, the garden variety, produce, you know, kind of farm. Or it could be livestock, something of that nature. But the premise was we made these three designations generally based upon those findings. Pretty simple.
And what's the implication of this map? To
Well, the implication, I think,
the
is-
zoning map process?
Yeah, well, the plan and the zoning could, you know, should come together. So if we're looking at, you know, any type of planning or policies, goals, strategies, objectives, et cetera, you know, I think this plan, or this map, map 15, the western part is, in my opinion, pretty much as it was, you know, when the plan was done, the last version of the plan. So the policy should be such that it would support a continuation of agriculture within that area. The other areas, you know, would simply progress, but not of the long-term character that the one in the west. The west is the really good stuff. As I said, there's other pockets, you know, that are around that may not be totally dependent upon the type of soil, but maybe the type of product, you know, that's done. So again, I think the validity of this still maintains itself. The policies and strategies that this is based upon, I believe, are still sound and to be supported at this time.
Okay. Then, I'll just mention item 607, right? It says obstacles to agricultural preservation, but if we sit down a bit earlier, we say, you know, the goal in these areas is to preserve the agricultural nature, right? Then this becomes kind of a checklist of things you shouldn't do in those areas. You shouldn't have urban services extend into existing agricultural areas, as a point made, right? And certainly the areas that we've identified here is suitable for agriculture over the long term, right?
Yeah, I think you've hit it right on the head. Once you start seeing an infiltration of uses that are either not agriculture or do not support long-term agriculture, then you're going to see that type of land use diminish in its long-term integrity. And, you know, the point that you mentioned, setting boundaries, that was so important in this plan, primarily when we're discussing the urban service district. That if the township is going to have an area like this, as we've talked so many times, the boundaries have to be established, they've got to be firm, and we can't see a, you know, some trend that would allow uses that are urban to go beyond the urban service district, for example, because then the whole validity of your plan begins to be questioned. So the boundaries are extremely important in the overall policies of this plan.
Yeah. And then we go down to 609A, it's on page 52, it says encouragement should be given as long as possible for long-term agricultural use of the most productive agricultural lands within the township based on a number of things. Rural character, suitable soils and such. Right? Then we get into policies, and I have a question. 610A talks about rural and non-rural development, and what's the definition of rural? And I don't know, it doesn't have to be precise, but that's kind of the guideline we're setting up here, because it says we're gonna direct non-rural development to areas of the township that designated for non-agricultural use, which to me is, you know, you go to that map, 15, and you look at that, and you say that's kind of the very coarse version of it, and then the zoning map follows from that, and so on and so forth. But, so, what is it we're meaning? What's commonly accepted as rural versus non-rural development?
I think,
We could be somewhat different here, I suppose, but what's common?
yeah, I think in terms of our zoning ordinance, we define it, especially in the new ordinance, we define it clearly, because we created districts we call rural districts. We identified, you know, the set of districts that are called rural in nature as that, and we also, of course, we have the residential districts are set up in a way that you could, that they have a range from large lot, kind of rural residential on well and septic, to more suburban or urban districts that are intended to be in areas that have sewer service. So the ordinance, I think, is one of the ways to implement the master plan. The zoning ordinance is defining those characteristics. As far as the master plan is concerned, I think, you know, the statement of rural versus non-rural, it can be left at that level, you know, with the detail addressed in the implementation, in the ordinance implementation.
So, maybe what we're saying is rural development is the type of development we're doing in our agricultural residential districts, and maybe that's what flows out of here, and that we establish some guidelines here under C, right, that says, it talks a little bit about the kinds of lot sizes and positionings and buffering and compatibility with natural features and stuff, and so it's, I guess, by extension, that's how we're saying what rural development could be in this section of the master plan, recognizing that it's precise in the way you set up a zoning district and apply it to the map, right? Well, the question, you know, I just asked because it's like someone could argue with you, well, wait a minute, that's not rural. Right? And so there's no fixed definition per se, right? It's kind of like, well, it's slightly fuzzy.
Yeah, it is, and much of what we're doing in this area is subjective, and that's why you exist as a body of residents to look at these issues and look at specific development projects that come before you, or rezoning cases that come before you, with the idea of making an informed decision as to whether you feel it is consistent with the plan.
Mm-hmm.
But in order for a plan like this to function, we do need a planning commission that can make those reasoned decisions, that can evaluate, that can hear testimony essentially, and make determinations based on the best information you have and your best,
Mm-hmm.
you know, your best informed decision making.
Yeah, so if I read through this, then it's like, it would seem like a site condominium with clustered homes and a protected open space by covenant would then, as long as it wasn't dense, would be considered rural development.
It could certainly, clustering homes to preserve farmland or preserve, you know, woodland or something like that, and doing it in a way that the view from adjacent properties and the road, you know, stays rural. Yeah, it absolutely could be considered rural land use.
Okay. It's helped me to just kind of talk through that a little bit. And again, I don't want to monopolize this. Yes, Mr. Penn?
I don't mean to jump in at you, but as Roddy mentioned, rural is pretty much in the eye of the beholder. It's perception. You talk about the site condominium. Sometimes it may be what you see or what you do not see as you drive down a road. If you drive down a road and your perception is, shall we say, open space, some woodlands, things of that nature, the perception is that's rural, perhaps even agriculture. But the site condominium concept could be a portion of a site for development, using clustering concepts, et cetera, where it is not, as we would perceive it, a characteristic subdivision. We've talked a lot of times driving down a road, if you see the backyards and the swing sets and the above-ground pools and the barbecues, et cetera, which I'm not saying that's bad, but that's a perception that it may not be rural. But if you're looking in our zoning ordinance, for example, and you're talking about site condominiums, you're talking about clustering zoning, you may see a buffering of land between the road and the development, or a woodlot that's been preserved, or a wetland, or a pond, or something that, as you view it from the road, that's what you're gonna see. So the perception is it may still be rural, but there's a little bit of development that is taking place where the resources have been preserved. So if development does come in, at least, my opinion is that following the clustering concept or site condominiums, that's going to protect not only the visual aspects of what you see or the perception of what you see, but also a significant effort to protect the actual environmental features of the site, as I say, the woodlands or the steep slopes or something of that nature, to kind of wrap the development around that and not throw out the typical grid system where you're driving down the road and that's all you see is driveways and curb cuts and things of that nature. So the perception has to be maintained, and that's why the strength of this plan is based upon the character that has been demonstrated many times of this community. So, answer to your question, it's a perception, but the perception has to be managed.
And then I have this, one of these off-the-wall questions, which is, why does the section on agricultural policies talk about residential development?
Very easy. I don't mean to jump in, no bad. You're opening some comments that were talked about in this community several years ago. And policy that's been maintained. Many communities look at agriculture from a zoning ordinance perspective that says, okay, what parcel size should you have for the preservation of agriculture? 5 acres, 10 acres, 20 acres, 40 acres. What is the determining point where it's going to be agriculture? This community has a 1 acre lot size in the agricultural district, which simply means that if you want to build a house in an agricultural district, it's a permitted use. You get your building permit, you get your septic, all that stuff, you build your house. So it's not a typical type of agricultural zoning. It could be called an agricultural residential type of zoning. And when you look at a lot of the areas, go back to map 15 in the southeast part of the community, that's pretty much what it is. There's a lot of either single-family dwellings on individual parcels, or there's site condominiums or something of that nature also on 1 acre parcels, but they can exist because the zoning ordinance says that you can build a house on 1 acre of land. So that's why the perception is a little bit difficult to make that distinction.
Well, many of us live in agricultural residential districts, right? And I'm sure quite a few don't, but when you live in an agricultural residential district, what you're saying is it's really an agricultural district that permits some residential. And because of that, we're talking about a district that's agricultural, and that's why we have some policy statements here related to the type of housing that coexists.
And it even becomes more important, as I said a moment ago, the perception. Since the agriculture district does allow 1 acre, which means that a subdivision or a site condominium could come in all 1 acre parcels, it's extremely important, because we're dealing with agriculture, visually to not begin a perception that it's really changing, into an open kind of agriculture, into a as I said a minute ago, curb cut that you can see from the road. The perception also is important here to give that rural flavor, the rural character, and perhaps not as much infringement into the agriculture. With somebody coming out driving through this community, say, well, just wall-to-wall houses. Well, it's not, because this community is concerned about the character and how the residential, if it comes in, is going to be treated in regards to the setting, the character, the scale, incorporation of natural resources into the plan. So that distinction is very sound in this portion of the document.
Okay. All right, I'm good with all that, but
But as Rodney said, the planning commission is the one that makes those decisions. You know, and I think, you know, that kind of separation not only exists now, has existed, but the chances of it, because the character, you know, once it gets going, you know, because the planning commission is up to date with these kinds of policies, these kind of strategies, these kind of tools for development, that you can continually control it. Because once you let it slip away, and somebody comes in and just clears a parcel of ground and tells you they're gonna plant street trees with a caliper of 2.5, and it's gonna be, you know, rural, you know, that's not quite, I think, what the planning commission has in mind for the future of the community. So the real incorporation of strategies is very important.
all right, well, I can go a little bit more, but I'm getting towards the end here. I was just, down in 611, it's agricultural strategies. And it talks about encouraging farmers to do this and encourage farmers to do that, and then discourage fragmentation of land parcels. And how are we really doing that? Is this active, or is this just through, let's call it guidelines to ensure are incorporated in the zoning ordinance?
We have a challenge in Michigan, a challenge, in, I guess, in the positive sense, that this is a strong private property rights state. And people have a substantial set of property rights when it comes especially to agricultural property, including, you know, the rights to divide that property under the Land Division Act, and to use that property in certain ways that may be covered by the Right to Farm Act, all those elements. So when it comes to the master plan, when it comes to implementing the policies of the master plan, some of these policies really are implemented by private decision making, and all we can do as a township is to encourage them in a certain direction. Certainly, I think the township has encouraged the use of land conservation, conservation easements to preserve farmland and other open lands, and encourage property owners to work with the local land conservancies. We are blessed in Washtenaw County to have access to several very active land conservancy organizations, as well as the Ann Arbor Greenbelt Program and the county Natural Areas Preservation Program, where there are some options if people want to go down that road of conserving land. But many decisions related to the master plan are private decisions. You know, they help to implement the plan. As you know, as part of our job is to educate people that these are the township's desired policies. You know, and to educate folks on the importance of them and trying to make them happen.
Yes, Mr.
A
Penn.
continued comment. Farmers are a very unique set of citizens. You've heard it said many times that a farmer, a lot of their value is in the land, you know, and we have to be careful, I think, because we're seeing, as you mentioned a while ago, to see how strong agriculture is from a statistical standpoint, how many farms are there, what's the size of the farms, et cetera. That's good information. But talk specifically about this township or any other township, there might be a time when a farmer just does not want to farm anymore. The family doesn't want to continue it, nobody's going to buy it, at least for farming practices. And I think that's gotta be recognized here. Because we can be very dictatorial that says, your land's gonna be, farming, you're never gonna change it. I think we've gotta be, very careful about that, because then we're dictating somebody else's property rights, as Rodney mentioned. If that situation happens, and many communities have seen it, and I've seen many, cases where, the family that no longer wants to farm, or they pass away or something, and then it's given to the kids don't want to farm, but they just start piecing it up, selling it off or whatever. That's why, to me, it's very important, if that does happen, to have a relationship with individuals within the community, so that you can acknowledge that that may happen, and work with that person, perhaps to develop their land. I'm not saying we should develop agriculture, that's not what I'm saying. But if it's going to go out of agriculture, it can go out just piecemeal and give the township, some, probably, maybe some unfortunate results as far as what it could be. Or to work with the person through the policies you've outlined and say, okay, you've got 100 acres, you've got 300 acres or whatever. Let's analyze that property and put forth a plan that it may not be agriculture, but it's not going to just be piecemeal kind of development that's going to be picked up by the, the lowest bidder or something of that nature. So I think this goes both ways. There's a lot of programs, as Rodney mentioned, for the farmer to continue farming, give economic incentives or other things. But at some point, we may have to deal with farms that are no longer going to be farmed for lots of reasons. But to work with those people, to put forth a plan so that it can be development, and it can have long-term value, maybe not as agriculture, but long-term value as residential, and again, that adds to the continuing character of the community. So I wanted to bring that up. It goes, kind of both ways.
Mm-hmm.
And Doug? Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Comment. What about land preservation now in that instance, when you talk about a farmer doesn't want to farm anymore? Maybe there would be some opportunities within the arena of land preservation that would be economically feasible to the farmer to maybe, turn the land into something like that, where you get the, the state and the federal funds and
Oh, sure, there's
whatnot.
lots of programs. Purchase
Yeah.
of development rights, we talk about all the time.
Rather than going, high-density residential or something,
Yeah.
because once, like you said, once you start down that road, it kind of tends to, take on its own life.
But it's their land.
Yeah, it's their land, I realize it, but they're still encouraging the people, I realize their land rights. We're talking about, I think, in the mode of encouraging people maybe to do things that are more positive for the township.
There's lots of programs.
Yeah,
This may not be the time to talk about.
rather than just go right to residential.
It's not just the ones that we hear about all the time, as I say, the purchase of development rights, or, a whole handful of other things. But it could be something that's more creative in working with an individual, or working with a developer that's gonna come in and develop a piece of ground. Both Rodney and I have worked many times with a developer that comes in, and we've worked out agreements, shall we say, where we say, okay, you wanna come in here, we might, through PUD, say you can have a little more density as, options become available. But we know that there's an 80-acre parcel on such and such a road. Do you think you could buy that, buy the development rights, sell it back to the farmer, so he can continue farming? And it's always gonna be farming because we control the development right. We've done that many times, and it's a different creative process in doing that, so that we have to look at, all the, the little tools in our bag, be aware of them, be brought up to date all the time as to what can be done legally, economically, and from a policy standpoint, what the master plan can say about it. So there's a whole bunch of things that we have to consider here.
Okay.
We're kind of in a situation where we're right in the middle of development everywhere, and we're kind of like the last of the Mohegans here, kind of us in Superior Township, between Ann Arbor, that's not totally developed. So there's going to be a lot of pressures for development coming down the road.
There's perceptions, as I mentioned before. We've talked about the mitigation of wetlands in Superior. Since we're the planners for Superior, we can talk for that. And we've been working with the township and all of the land from Getty's Road all the way up to Ford Road, on both sides of the road, has been tied up in either wetland mitigation, the program I said a minute ago, where developers have bought land, leased it back, or it's gone in some kind of conservancy, preservation zone, that entire corridor. And that's the perception, because as you drive Prospect Road, you're gonna see this openness. There might be development someday, but it's gonna be back, and it's gonna be another type of development. But as you drive, the perception is, gee, this is kinda nice, I'm out in the rural area, not out into the backyards of barbecues and swing sets. So, you know, those are policies that you can actually put into the ordinance through the PUD process that says, okay, along 8 Mile, or say, you know, whatever road here, we would like to see, you know, a setback of such and such that's going to be a buffer, it's gonna be a landscape, it's gonna be whatever, and we're gonna control access so that we're not gonna see, you know, development as we drive down the road. You know, all of those are possibilities in this, you know, master plan, but it's gotta be a living document. So when we see things happening, we can work with the developer or property owner, whoever, to suggest these things, because most of the good type of development that's long-lasting is well thought-out planning processes.
So your experiential experience with Superior Township would give us some examples to emulate, probably, if we were to run into that situation.
You know, I think there's truly a need to be more active. If we want to have agriculture be part of the community, we have to be more active than we had to be a generation ago. There was a time when basically, if it was an agricultural area, you simply left it alone. That was not part of what we planned. We sort of planned around it for the things that we need to do otherwise, residential and commercial and such. But this plan recognizes the need to actually do something, to have some active policies if we're going to keep agriculture in Salem Township. And it's really because of the stresses that have, the pressures that have been on this land in the past. We're still in somewhat of a lull development-wise. Development activity is starting to come back. We're seeing things, developers kicking tires in various communities, but we're still on some of that lull related to the economy. That pressure will come back again. And as you said, Salem and really Superior Township next door are this space between the pressures of Metro Detroit, the pressures of Ann Arbor and Brighton, Novi and such. And the question is, what will Salem Township become in the future? Well, that's what this plan is intended to address in a more active way. And also, and that's again the reason why we spent so much time on the zoning ordinance in this area, to try to give farmers tools that allow them to remain successful and continue to operate, as they have, because that then preserves the character of the community.
Maybe one other observation, and that is when we say in 611 we want to encourage farmers to do this or do that, or encourage certain assessment policies and such, at least what we're saying is we can't discourage that, right? I mean, you can't necessarily quantify how much is encouragement, but it's very clear to say that the master plan suggestion is we would be encouraging and helping farmers participate in farmland agreements under the Farmland and Open Space Preservation Act and such, rather than making it an issue where we try to thwart it.
And really, we've taken, even beyond this, with this document, we've of course taken the step related to Parks, Recreation, and Open Space Plan, where there is a funding mechanism potential associated with that, grant funding and such, to continue this process of preserving open land in the community. Not, in that case, not necessarily for farming, but open space, rural care, preserving the rural character of the community, which helps to preserve farmland and agriculture as well.
And I agree, and so I can see how some of those actions that have been taking place in the township over the last 3 years, if you count the legwork and such, are in line with what's spelled out here in the current master plan. And that's what kind of states the temperament, at least in terms of what the township has actually said. This is the direction we're heading. Okay. I think
Can I
yes,
ask-
sir, Darrell.
Can I ask one question? When you talk about Superior, Prospect Road there, what happens to the value of the, or the tax? Does it go up or does it go down? The township, are they gaining money in the pot, or are they losing money in the pot by doing all that mitigating and all that stuff down Prospect Road where there won't be anything built on it?
Interesting question. I don't think it has an immediate answer, because one of the strong policies of Superior was and is, we are not going to look like those guys.
Mm-hmm.
So at what cost do you make that determination? So the commitment was really to go now for a character, a visual perspective that's going to stabilize this road. We may have to pay the cost now, but we've also found that when housing takes place on the other side, it's a much higher level house, adds more to the tax base. So it's something that's very difficult to say right now, is it worth it? I think long-term, it's absolutely worth it. But there is a cost to pay.
You know, somewhat it depends on the type of ownership. The county's natural areas preservation program typically has bought land and owned it as county land. The Stabler Farm parcel that's on Plymouth Hanover Road there in Superior Township is one of those, where the county has purchased that and will eventually own it. There's long-term arrangement associated with that. But in that case, it then it's taken off the tax rolls entirely. If, on the other hand, the conservation of the land is done through a private conservation easement, where the farmer or future owners retain ownership rights, they then continue to pay taxes on that property as agricultural land. And it is interesting that well, first of all, we've had, over the last few years, agricultural land seemed to have more value than residential property, property intended for development as residences. But also these conserved lands tend to go up in value as agricultural land, because there's a recognition that it's going to continue to be that. We can make long-term investments in this land because it's got an easement on it that says that it can't be used for anything other than agriculture.
Thank you.
Okay. How about the public related to section 6? Yes, Ms. Hamilton.
With due respect, I'm gonna disagree with a lot of what was said here tonight. And I'm gonna tell you that, the truth about how farming works. You have 2 dairy farmers today in Salem Township. That's it. 2. Where there used to be a dairy farm every mile. And you cannot penalize the last 3 to 6 farmers in the community because they were foolish enough to be good stewards of their land and hold on to their farm. And it has been said at some point, someone may not want to farm. The map that you have did one thing. It took, on the west side of the township, that land, the large parcels are owned by 6 families. And it simply encompassed them. It was easy to do because those were families that were good land stewards. They were committed to that land. We have on this map where it says this is good agricultural land, this is marginal, and this really isn't agricultural land. That's a crop. Farming is a science. And before I plant any crop on the 650 acres that we farm, 550 that we own, we take soil out and we have it tested as to exactly what fertilizers needed, is lime needed, and you can take any soil. We have soil that's heavy clay, we have soil that's sandy, and you can get a good crop on almost any field, barring too much rain or too little rain in a normal year. I will tell you that, and I'd like to address this map, that this map in and of itself, the township will lose 300 to 400 acres of farmland because there's 300 to 400 acres in active agricultural production right now that are in the white. And so when you want a farmer to preserve land and you want us to take a look at perhaps getting into some of the programs as was just done on the Cork farm, where they got into the federal program as that farm changed hands, and they bought the development rights off that farm, we're not even eligible for them because our east farm is totally not in any type of acceptable agricultural land. It's not marginal, and we've been farming it since 1959. So that's the first thing. I think you need to adjust this map. And it needs to be done, again, where land is truly farmed. Because any land, I mean, over in Israel, the desert blooms today. And that's a reality. When I read through your policies, there's not a lot of encouragement for the farmer. Most of the encouragement is for the other landowners. Everybody wants our land to stay vacant, but there aren't policies in place to help us. Long-term agriculture cannot be legislated. You can't do it. You can't tell me that I can milk cows or the family for the next 100 years and we can make a go of it. Can't do it. The fact we've been doing it for almost 150 years, at some point you may not be able to do it. So if you look at all the key indicators for long-term agriculture, Salem is not anywhere in its borders set up for long-term agriculture. When I want to buy a part for a tractor, I have to drive 50 miles. If the transmission goes out on my tractor today, I'm hauling it 50 miles to have it repaired. If I want to rent another 50 to 100 acres, it doesn't exist in Salem Township to rent. Those are classic signs that long-term agriculture is not viable. And again, when you go back to your map and you look at what you have, land that you're going to preserve, again, I think most of you know we have the largest farm here in the township. We have two farms. One parcel that we own is 119.6 acres. That's the largest single parcel we own. That's in the dark. The next largest parcel that we own is about 70 acres. It's in the white area of the map. The second large, and we own 14 to 16 parcels. The second largest parcel that we own, that we actively farm, on the map is indicated it's not even viable for agriculture. And if this map is to set up where agriculture truly belongs, then let's at least include the land that's been under cultivation for the last 60 years. And we're not doing that. And then when we talk about encouraging the farmer, let me give you some real life things that would encourage a farmer. And again, some of the things have been referenced, but not where they put it where we walk. A farmer may have a need to sell some land. Grandma's got to go in a nursing home. You may need to fund a college education. Today we have to cut 2-acre chunks out. Every chunk has to have road frontage. Can't have shared driveways. You can't have the road as part of the calculation for land area. You actually have to have minimum of 2.26 acres. Those types of policies don't help farmers stay in farming. And actually what you see in most farming communities that have policies like Salem, that's where you go down the road and you see all the houses along the road and the swimming pools and the barbecues, as was referenced, and behind the houses you farm. Because the farmers had to cut along the road because he's got to have road frontage. 20 years ago in Salem, you could have a shared driveway. I could have a parcel in the back and a parcel in the front, and I could have one driveway that the two parcels shared. Can't do that today. I have to have a 66 private road easement to do that. Those types of policies don't help farmers stay farming. And it's nice to think that we can legislate, that we can go to truck farming, we can go to agritourism, but that's not a reality either. You can't do that. You have to provide those policies so that they're possible. but you can't do it. And there are very few farms here in Salem Township where the farm pays its way. And there's a reason for it. And again, it's because the policies here don't truly help farming. And I appreciate that you care, and I appreciate you trying to be educated on it. But read through this. When I read through it over the weekend, I was utterly shocked that the encouragement is not for me, the landowner who farms, it's for my neighbor who doesn't farm. In the township, so that you don't think I'm just doom and gloom, the township's doing things right. Again, the court farm recently changed hands, if you're familiar with that. It's at 6 Mile and Tower, and the township helped them get some federal grant dollars to buy those development rights off the farm, because the north side of that farm perks, it sits on sand. And those are the types of policies that help farmers, that help landscape and agriculture, because it takes that development right. If you have a farm, and we'll take Quartz because they've sold out, they have 4 heirs at the farm. And you have 3 heirs that say, I don't want to farm, it is a lot of work to farm. Anybody that farms will tell you that. Biggest gamblers on the face of the earth, you plant seeds and you hope there's the proper amount of sun and the proper amount of moisture, and that your crop grows. And so when you have to buy the heirs out who don't farm, you can't do it with development rights on the property. So the township is doing some things right. And I don't want you to feel that I don't think that. But I think that this, if you're serious that you want agriculture to continue, as long as it's economically viable in this community, changes need to be made. Thank you.
Anyone else? Good comments. Okay, why don't we move on to the residential section, and then we'll come back and talk about work list after we're done with that. Okay? And so I think in your overview, Mr. Nanny, you covered both parcels, 6 and 7, right? So we can just kind of get started here as a planning commission into number 6 or number 7.
We had said after public comment, we come back to the commission for
Oh,
comments on
yeah,
the
yeah,
same
yeah, I'm
section,
sorry.
if that's
I was
okay.
gonna do that.
Yeah, just real quick, what, in your words, what is the purpose of that map? What value do we want to add by putting that map there? And I'm gonna play devil's advocate, and it was kind of something I was thinking, if that map says something that it says, okay, this is great farming land, and someone says, well, based on this map that was in this planning document, I purchased that land, and it turns out I can't use this land for farming at all because this, that, and the other, could be trouble. Whereas, if someone wants to sell the land, and that map says it's not viable farming land, but yet it's blooming like crazy, it may be something that could cause trouble the other way. And so, I mean, if it has a purpose, let's leave it, but I'd say if it doesn't, maybe it's something we should consider removing. So I guess what I'm really asking is, what was the end that this map was the means to?
But it has a number of purposes. One is simply as an identifying tool, that identify, as Don mentioned, identifying a number of characteristics, including soil type and prominent parcel size. Say these are areas that have a certain character. The title there, lands designated for agricultural preservation, is also tied to some conservation, land conservation elements. There are certain programs that are available or have been available in the past related to conservation, purchase of development rights and such that were based on maps like this, that specifically were called out as lands designated for agricultural preservation. The idea that the community identified these are the places where we want preservation to take place. And the reason for that, actually, I think as Ms. Hamilton mentioned, some of these policies actually talk about not the agricultural activity, but the neighbor of the agricultural activity. Well, this is one of the cases where, with land conservation, any property owner can seek out a conservation easement. But, for example, as has happened, a property owner in the urban service district that decides to put a conservation easement on their property puts a real wrench in the master plan for that urban service district. Essentially, by putting a conservation easement on a piece of property there, they put a big hole in, create a donut essentially out of that, and potentially create trouble for creating integrated road networks and really building neighborhoods in there, because they create a spot where you can't do that anymore because there's an easement on it that prevents those things. So by creating a map like this, we're identifying not only where the township would prefer to have lands preserved, but also where the township doesn't want lands preserved by conservation easements.
It says lands designated for,
Agricultural preservation, that's the title of the map, title of the section there above it.
and those are somewhere designated, that those boundaries defined on that map are somewhere designated by someone other than this.
What's that, they're designated here, but what it is we have outside entities that want to see a map like this and they want to see that the land is within these designated areas before they consider doing a purchase and development rights program.
Designated is a strong word.
Well, everything in the master plan is designated. We designate land for various future land uses. Here we're designating land for agricultural preservation.
Rodney, it might help the planning commission understand if I have preserved land, particularly in P-116, in an urban services district, sewer has to go around the parcel. It can't even cross it.
Yeah, and that has actually happened. We have that situation in our urban service district where we have a piece of property that was put into a conservation easement by private action, but what it then creates, it creates real trouble for the planning of those utilities and development activity when the property around it is developed.
I think it's trouble if it's known, it's trouble if it's not known.
Well, no, it's trouble
It
both
becomes
ways.
part of it may be more in-depth plan.
Well, but the problem is you have a much higher cost. You're suddenly routing roads and utilities around this thing rather than being able to go make it an integrated part of the development or the neighborhood.
If it's known before it's bought, then it's known. Okay. I guess. I don't know, I'm trying to get at, so what is the purpose of this map? The purpose of this map is for someone who's looking for what, to find out what?
Well, as I said, it's several. It's number one, to identify areas of the township that because of these characteristics, should be preserved as for agricultural activities. That's a township, township planning.
That requires one color.
Well, it doesn't necessarily, because what this notes is that there are, there's a range of value in agricultural land. As was mentioned, soil types are an issue. Certainly, you can farm what would be considered poor farmland soils. You can farm it if you put the additional effort into it with fertilizers and limes and other things to condition the soil to achieve the yield you need. But the idea here is to identify the most important farmlands to preserve based on these characteristics are listed here, but also that there are areas that may not have all the characteristics but have some, and that's what essentially these secondary areas are identified
Okay,
as.
so a lot of those colors came from soil plots?
But
The soil-
if you look on page 49 and 50, it basically lists the characteristics that were used to create the map. Now, that's sort of the township planning part of it. As I said, it has the secondary value related to these outside entities that are doing purchase and development right programs and conservation easement programs. That they want to see a map like this, and they want to see that the property that's nominated to them is within one of these areas. That then gives that property a higher priority on their radar for their outside activities, whether, when they're considering whether to pull the trigger on a purchase of development rights or some other effort like that.
Thanks.
Okay. I think maybe I have a better understanding of the map, which is, it's not speaking at all to the white area. It's really only speaking to the two different shaded areas.
Yeah, the white area, like I said, the key there is the indication by the township that we don't want necessarily to see those, that those areas are intended for something other than agricultural long-term. And that's reflected, if you look at the other future land use map, related residential and other, you'll see essentially that side of it. It's almost the inverse of this map when you look at the future land use
You're
map.
not
residential.
affording the region that's in white with designation of you're trying to preserve agriculture there. You're just saying, rather than us trying to preserve agriculture there, that's an area that's in play.
Right.
But you're not saying, take agriculture out of there, it's just in play.
The other areas are in play as well.
Unless you do something.
Yeah, I'm not
over
understanding,
the
I mean, they're privately owned, if they want to, if someone wants to go residential in an area that's, you know, prime agricultural land, great, and if they want to keep farming a piece of land that's in between two developments that this map says is junky, it can't grow crabgrass, great. I guess I'm right back to, I'm still struggling with the relevance of, and the purpose behind this. You know, it doesn't sound like, I love you guys, man, but I'm struggling with this.
I think the key to this map may be, I mean, like I said, this map used the criteria you have listed here, page 4950, those were the character elements that were used to create the map. Now, was mentioned, Ms. Hamilton mentioned tonight the idea of adding a characteristic to this, that to specifically call out farmland that's been in production for decades, and to add that to the map. There's nothing preventing you as a planning commissioner from deciding that you feel that we need to change the criteria upon which the map is based, and then change the map accordingly. And identify other areas that are either part of the secondary agriculture, the dots, or part of the long-term agriculture. That is part of the discussion. That's why we look at these plans every 5 years, and we consider these issues. The criteria here are, most of them are measurable using data that's available, either soil data or other data. This added element of the human element of this has been in production, and the family that has it in production intends it to remain in production, is one that you can consider and decide whether it's relevant to add in.
Okay, then help me with, okay, I guess it would be the darker area, you know, I obviously don't have this in front of me. The darker area, we say the township would encourage that area to remain agricultural use. If John Q. Farmer wanted to sell that land, develop 66-foot wide easements, put roads through, put properties up with proper road frontage, et cetera, how would we encourage that property to remain agricultural? How would Salem Township sit there and say, oh, we encourage that to stay agricultural? What would we do?
I think quite frankly, the township has had a number of policies that head that direction. We have a land preservation board that has been active, and that's part of their charge, is to do this encouraging, you might say, do the educating that's involved. As I talked from the very beginning, we're a strong property rights state.
I encourage a
property
man
owner
to go to a
has-
piece of wood with a hammer.
The property owner has the certain property rights, and they have the
Okay.
ability, if they choose, based on the zoning ordinance, following the ordinance, to develop in accordance with the ordinance. The ordinance itself does encourage some of tries to head in the direction of encouraging rural character as best it can. We have, when it comes to these rural developments, there's a lot that can be done under the Land Division Act with meets and bounds land division, where the project, it can look and feel like a development project, but it never comes to you because the Land Division Act allows certain things to happen. So we are limited in terms of the regulatory aspect and how much we can do. That's why I think that those policy statements have a lot of encourage the private property owner to consider or do these things. We can't compel in most cases.
Okay.
I think that's where some of the confusion is. This isn't dictating, it's basically illustrating, you know, and designating exactly how this land is, you know, whether it's agriculture or it's not, or, you know, it's pretty much laying that out as a tool, I would think, to understand the various properties within the township.
Where I think where there may be not a compulsion element, but an element where we have an effect is related to these outside organizations who do purchase of development rights. In that if a piece of property is in the white area, it drops to a lower, it could, depends on what their criteria is, but it could drop to a lower priority for them. And I think in that way, it has an effect, almost a regulatory effect. But it's not township regulation, it's simply that outside entity it looks at what the township is doing and is responding to it with their program.
And I have one more comment. I just want to refer back. I kind of highlighted the area that you talked about in the beginning under 603, the SEMCOG figures, and we're 14 years behind on those figures, and I think they would be a good indicator as to how the township is developing, being that they're showing reduction in farmland, agricultural land, farmers basically, and you know, we would kind of see, you know, what kind of development we've had and how it relates to the agricultural part of our community. I think that's a important piece.
Quiet, we're quiet again. No, it was, you got us into a really good section there. Okay.
Thanks, guys.
That's right.
But I had another thought. Maybe I would just remind people, we talked, you know, the suggestion was maybe now with value-added agricultural activities and agritourism, right? And so I just pulled out the zoning ordinance just to kind of like help remind myself what that was. But when we talk farm-based tourism, entertainment activities, and farm markets, we talk about agriculture festivals and events, farm-based or seasonal recreation attractions, petting farms, play areas, corn mazes, hay rides and displays, wineries and cider mills, farm-based education centers, and some accessory activities, farm markets, and things that would be similar, right? And that's what we mean, and one of the things to consider here is that outside the scope of what's talked about here is agriculture, or is this all encompassing and that just kind of fits in automatically? Right, because it's like if you had a sense that it didn't fit in automatically, then maybe we would need to insert it as an active piece of work. But if we think it fits into the way agriculture is talked about here in the master plan, then we might choose not to do something. But I just thought I should bring that up. Okay? We were gonna ask that question at the end anyways, but so be it. Are we ready to go to residential land use now? Okay. We had a quick overview. I'll just start off by saying, at first I wanted to understand the difference between rural residential and urban residential, and then when I read under urban residential, it became obvious because urban residential are areas which are served by a public sanitary sewer system.
That certainly is a very strong part of the definition.
Right. Okay, so everything else, if it's not served by a sanitary sewer system, a public sanitary sewer system, it's rural residential and falls under those kinds of guidelines that are spelled out here. And rural residential, would that include, says rural residential is a primarily rural residential area with certain agricultural activities permitted. And so, now I'm trying to understand, rural residential here is not what we talk about when we talk about agricultural residential zoning. Is that correct?
Now, this is, we're really looking at, I guess if you want to compare it to zoning, would be more like the estate residential classification and such. Essentially, the agricultural residential, agriculture or those activities are intended to be sort of predominant activity, with residential being secondary to it. Here, we're talking about rural residential where rural residences are the predominant activity, but there might be some agriculture that is part of it, kind of secondary in there, but not the prominent activity. It's all in the range. We're going from the range of very, very low intensity activities of agriculture, lots of open space, to very urban at the other end, with commercial and industrial and such.
Okay. And I went through the objectives and policies, and I didn't have particular issues with any of it. But I did have a question, and it's kind of puts you on the spot, but, one of the residential strategies, this is page 60, item D, and it's in 707, it said, amend the township zoning ordinance to incorporate the residential policies of this plan. And so given that this plan preceded the zoning ordinance rewrite, am I correct in assuming that the zoning ordinance rewrite that we worked through over the last 3.5 years actually did follow through on that recommendation?
Yes, as part of the zoning ordinance update, very early on, we identified sort of a list of things to consider doing, and that was, much of that was based on the master plan, going through it and looking at the policy statements and recommendations. So yes, that they should be reflected in the ordinance.
Yes, it did.
Who's got any thoughts? We're talked out.
Did E of the 707 residential strategies ever get done initiating a utility feasibility study?
For the urban search district, I believe so,
Okay. So that could be,
the township
if you've
engineer
done
has a utility study for the urban service district.
Well, if there's nothing here, is there any public comment related to the residential land use section? Okay, so now, with that, I guess, let's take these one at a time, okay? Part 6, the suggestion from the planners was we may want to update the objectives, policies, and strategies to address trends in value-added agricultural activities, agritourism, or specialty farming, and such. We could choose to do that or not. We could choose to do something else. And I guess my question is what's the sentiment about going in and updating those objectives and policies and strategies? Who wants to do that?
How would it integrate into the master plan? When discussing, if it were to discuss these agricultural, land-based activities, I mean, the master plan is more of, it's not.
Wait, I guess this is key. As I mentioned when I talked about this, we sort of did this backwards from the I guess you might say the traditional approach. We were talking about zoning, we were working on the zoning ordinance, so in conjunction with that, we had the discussion about the idea of expanding the potential list of activities that could be allowed in the agricultural residential district, to include these value-added things. And we did that. But with zoning, the state zoning act says that the zoning ordinance must be based on a plan. And it is this master plan that is that foundation document. The idea of amending Part 6 to add in policy, goal and objective and policy statements related to value-added agriculture is essentially to build the foundation under the structure we've already created in the zoning ordinance. You know, it's not the easy way to build a building, but that's what we're essentially doing, is building the foundation underneath that. So in the future, when questions arise about what is appropriate, you know, if there are questions about what is our goal related to value-added agriculture, you can go back to the plan and say, this is the goal, this is what we intend by that. And that's why I think I think it would be a valuable addition to the plan to tie back to what we've done in the ordinance. In terms of integrating the plan, it would be a new subsection in Part 6. We would really add language in that addresses it as a separate piece of it and add separate policy statements related to it. It wouldn't be a big section. You know, we're not talking 20 pages of text or anything. We're talking a short section that covers that topic. The other element, I think, to add to this would be the data, the question about acreage, farmland loss.
I'm sorry?
The other item I think in Part 6 to consider would be the question about whether to update the data related to a loss of agricultural land, where we have the 1990 and 2000 data to look to see if we have 2010 data. That I think is another valuable addition to the plan if you're interested.
If anyone asks, you know, how much agricultural was lost, they're gonna ask, well, what did it go to? That's the next question, so maybe there's something that just shows, hey, there's, you know, what, 640 times 64, 8 by 8, or 8 miles by 8 miles. So
Well, SimCog, I think
so
this
somebody's
is, SimCog does this by aerial.
acres in there and what percentage it is.
SimCog does this by aerial photo interpretation. Essentially, they're going, you know, so they're looking at, is that farmland? You know, has it turned into something else, whether it's developed for residences or what? You know, it's like it is a rough measure because some things may have changed from farmland into non-farmland, but it's still, you know, essentially rural land of some sort. Maybe, for example, that Superior Township case, land that went from farmland to you know, large wetland preservation area.
I think the language here kind of identifies that. This loss of productive agricultural lands has partially resulted from the numerous single-family dwellings. And I think that would be an indicator too, if there's a lot more single-family dwellings in agricultural areas and that's changing the complexion of the properties. You know, and it would give us a trend or an idea of, you know, how this plan's working and what direction reality's going.
Right.
I have an idea, based on what we're saying here, okay? I don't think we want to say, okay, we want to update the master plan without having something a bit more concrete in front of us to consider as things that you might want to put into the master plan. So what I would propose we do is postpone any further discussion, not table, right? Because table means come up later in the same meeting, right? Okay. But postpone to our next meeting the final discussion on section 6 of the master plan, and ask that we have, we see updated data related to the gross, you know, the gross acreage in agriculture and such, that we see some specific parcel inventory related to, let's call it, of what's being used agriculturally and not currently, and in particular, I'd like to see the area south of 6 Mile and between 6 Mile and Brookville, or I don't know, I'd like to see 6 Mile and North Territorial west of about, let's say, Curry Road. Is is that far enough east?
Gotta
Or
go all the way to
you further
Salem
east
Road.
than Curry?
Actually, there's a large significant amount of land farmed on North Territorial east of Goffredson Road.
Yeah, oh, I understand, but I'm just trying to get into a chunk of this white stuff here that's kind of centered on 5 Mile and Curtis.
If we were just, Doug, to come straight down 5 Mile, starting a quarter mile down 5 Mile from Curtis Road, you go east all the way to Salem Road. All of that land on the south side is an agricultural production.
Yeah. So I'd just like to see the inventory that kind of covers that area, you know, from like Salem west, right, and that's between 5 Mile and between 6 Mile and Brookville. I'd just like to understand how it's being used today and how we classify it. And then I think that would help us understand if we're missing an opportunity with this map, although I don't see the map as a huge determinant, but I'd still like to see it. You know, because I think if we had that information, we would understand this better. And then, so that was my second item, was the inventory of active farmland in kind of that area. And then my last point would be, I'd like to see a draft statement to add to section 611 under agricultural strategies that would be, that would tie into the agricultural tourism activities that we added to the zoning ordinance, and how we would, you know, how and why we would encourage them. Right?
Kind of, maybe, almost, you might say, kind of an outline of what we.
Because I see the tie-in there of agricultural tourism can help make farming profitable so that it can continue in existing areas. And I recognize that linkage, so I would like us to consider a positive statement to add in it as a strategy, right? Given that, you know, the most we can say is encourage, but, because we can't tell people what to do, but we should at least consider that as a group, as to whether we would want to add that to this plan.
We could put something in there about making it, making the climate more favorable to, work that into their farms,
He'll know what to do.
You know.
He'll know what to do.
to continue the viability.
Yeah, if you'd like, we certainly could put some language together, put some materials together on this.
Permitted and encouraged.
And you will also take another look at to make sure that we're compatible with the zoning ordinances relative to this section. I mean, if we're gonna make some changes, maybe we need to, maybe the horse is in back of the cart here somewhere and we can put it back in front.
Yeah. Yes, we can do that.
Okay.
Okay, are we okay with that? Okay, so is there anything else to add to that punch list? Okay.
I'll just say, that let's just be careful, because there's many things that are, I would think that are defined in the township ordinances that aren't mentioned in the master plan. So, I mean, I can see the point in this, but if we start outlining every detail in the master plan that goes into the township ordinance, these documents are gonna get pretty obtrusive.
Yeah, no, I just
So
have,
I see this one, but let's be careful this doesn't become.
I just have a sense, as it's been explained,
Yeah.
by the public, and we've gotten through many years of information related to the agricultural tourism whole discussion that's taken place over the last year and a half. The economic situation that farmers face isn't always positive, and if we want to encourage agriculture, we ought to consider what to encourage. That's nonsense sentence on my part, pardon me. But anyway, we ought to give it, see what we could do equivalent to the current agricultural strategies we've outlined and consider something like that, do we, well, if you give us a draft, then we'll be able to decide whether it's a huge problem not to have it in there, whether it's a little problem, whether, well, now that we look at it, I don't see it's worthwhile.
We can do that for you for next
Okay.
month.
So that was the work list, and then as regards residential land use, I'm getting the sense that we're all comfortable with that section. And so we don't see any reason to revise that. We wouldn't follow up on the suggestions there. Okay. I'd say that ends our discussion of the master plan review for this evening. And now we'll move on to item 9, which is reports of commissioners and committees. I'm not aware of any. We do not. A couple things to go here, and we can get through this. Next item up is approval of minutes from March 17th. And everyone should have a draft copy. I had mine and I reviewed it. And I didn't find any issue. But at this point, does someone want to make a motion related to those minutes?
Motion to accept the minutes as presented.
Okay, is there a second? Also, Ms. Kelly, okay? All right. We can do this with a voice vote, so all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? None, so the minutes are approved as presented. Very good. Now we have reports and announcements, and I believe we've got something up. Item 11, it lists a discussion of proposed development on the corner of Napier and Joy Roads, and I'm curious to hear about this.
I don't think there's anyone here to make a kind of presentation.
This is not here for tonight. This actually was put on here because, just to give you a heads up, that at your May meeting, there will be a pre-application conference. They said the developers indicated that they'd like to be on the agenda to present a conceptual plan for development within the urban service district on the former Johnson Controls property. Anyway, we'll leave it to them to present it, but just want to give you the heads up that that will be part of our next meeting. It is not a project. It's not an office park project like is currently planned for that area. But we did meet with the developer a couple of weeks ago, they show us the concept. We had a few comments on it. They're going to bring it to you to present it and take back any thoughts that you have. With the intent, their intent is to come back to you and ultimately submit the project as part of a plan unit development application.
Okay, but the first thing we will see won't be the application for the PUD, but we'll get kind of an overview as an introduction to what's going on to get a better sense of what's coming our way.
Yeah, the first step in the plan unit development process is what's called a pre-application conference, and that's where they come to you and simply, it's sort of a dog and pony show, introduce their idea and talk about what they'd like to do, and to answer any questions you have, and also hear any comments you may have on that concept, on their concept and what they're thinking. This is not something where there are any decisions made. And in fact, it says right in the ordinance that any comments that are made by the township are not binding, that simply that you're commenting as individual commissioners. But it is helpful to the developers to go through this process because they can learn what concerns you may have and maybe they can address them before they submit their plans formally. But it is the first step in the PUD process. And so we would be likely to be seeing an application after that at some point.
Okay. Interesting.
John, can I ask a question? What was this for, given to us for? Did I miss something on this real estate summary sheet?
That was part of the
Mitigation?
wetland mitigation. That was the actual parcel that the mitigation is going to
Oh,
take
okay.
place on.
I'll put that with
I
it.
thought you might want some more information than was provided by
Okay, thank you.
the state, just kind of to clarify it a little further what was happening.
All right. Item 12, public comment. Ms. Cook?
Yes. I've been trying to find on the website, in minutes on demand, anything past July of last year. There's no minutes for this board posted on where you archive them on the website. There's nothing there from July forward.
An email was sent to the deputy treasurer today, or the deputy clerk.
I'm sorry, Donna, I cannot
There,
hear you.
we're taking care of it. We're notifying the people that have to do it. I think they were just listing the minutes and they weren't getting into the archives. And we have to figure out how to do that.
Okay,
So, yeah, we're aware of that and we'll be taken care of.
thank you.
Any other public comment? Ms. Hamilton?
Would it be possible for the public to get a copy of whatever's being proposed changes to section 6 of the growth management plan prior to next month's meeting? So once again, we can have intelligent comments, if any, on that, and we don't have to sit and read it here. Thank you.
Normally, we would have the information available for the planning commission members a week ahead. And so, can we arrange to have copies available for the public, either post it, if it's
It won't be
convenient to
posted,
post
but
it,
it
or
will be
have hard
available.
copies in the office?
There will be copies in the office. It won't be posted.
The reason we don't post it is because it's the consultant's document. Until you as a planning commission said, this is right.
Yeah.
It's not the planning commission's document. So it certainly would be available, as you said, the week before the meeting. And I think it would be arranged to make sure that anybody who wanted to see a copy would be able to come in and see a copy of it.
Yeah,
Okay.
but we can't
I
post
mean,
it.
I understand there's certain processes we have to respect and so on, okay, but we will have it available.
Yeah.
And that'll be Monday, a week before.
Typically,
Our next
the
meeting.
Monday or Tuesday before your meeting.
Okay. Are we done with public comment? We are. All right, we are adjourned at 9:22. Thank you.